Okay, so at every foundation of a VFX pipeline sits a database system. So whether you're using a system like Shotgun or F-Track, or any custom-made VFX pipeline, there's always a database system behind the scene. So you can use it to store your project, shot, and user information, as well as all the shot status. You can also maybe use it to make a footage library, so the possibilities are pretty much endless. So for that, we want to use a system that is fast and flexible and has a good Python API so that we can use it in all the VFX software like Nuke. So what we're going to use is a non-relational database system called MongoDB. It's very easy to learn and yet very powerful. And to talk to MongoDB, we're going to use the Python module called MongoEngine. MongoEngine is a very powerful library that sits on top of the default MongoDB library of PyMongo. It will give us possibilities to store Python class objects directly inside the database. And like I'll be showing in this video, I will recommend first to check class 6 of my previous PySite for Nuke training before watching this one. Because in this class, I spent some time explaining the foundation of MongoDB along with the default PyMongo module. That training is a bit old and even some of the software names has changed, but still pretty much everything is still valid today. So in this first video, we're going to do a quick look at MongoDB as well as the PyMongo API in Python. And then we'll take a look at the document system of MongoEngine as well as all the different fields that we can use with those documents. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start by installing everything we'll be needing for this MongoEngine tutorial. So first, let's download MongoDB. So just open a web browser and we'll search for MongoDB download. That. So just search for whatever is linking to a download for MongoDB. So I will take the Mongo Download Center. And here you can download. What we need is the server, which is basically a local instance of MongoDB. You could also create a cloud instance on their website so that you can have an online database. But for this training, what we're going to do is use a local server on our computer. So we're going to go on the server tab, and here you can select whatever system you're using. So in my case, I'm going to use Windows, and I'll download the zip file. So you could either select the, depending on your OS, you'll have different type of package you can download. So for Windows, I'm just going to select the zip file and I'm going to download that. And I've already downloaded this file here, so I won't do it again. And then we need to download Robo3T, which is a graphical representation of MongoDB that we can see using an interface so that we have a good view of what's inside our DB. So we'll just then do a quick search for Robo3T. And here we have RoboMongo Robo3T. And you just need to download the Robo3T installer. You don't need everything, all the studio and everything. Just download the Robo3T installer. So we click here. So you just need to fill everything, and then you just download for whatever system you're using, and then you just need to install this. So I've already downloaded everything. So let's start by just installing Robo3T. So it's a simple double-click install. Double-click on that. So just click next, agree to everything, install it at its default location, and we'll install it. And there you have it. So we'll just click on finish. Agree, next, fill all the information and click finish. And there you have Robo3T that has launched, but now we need to install MongoDB so that we can connect to the database. So for now, we'll just close Robo3T. And here I have the download package of MongoDB. So if we go inside that, you'll see that it's it needs to be launched from the command prompt. So I've just copied that to this install folder. I'll just copy that directly on my C drive. So I'll just go here and I'll paste it here. And then I'll just rename the folder to something more simple like MongoDB. And apply that. So to launch MongoDB, you just need to open a shell. So I'll just open a command prompt. And I'll just go on the root of my C drive. So inside I'll go inside MongoDB. And here you have a bin folder where the executable is located. So I'll go inside the bin folder. And you need to execute MongoD.exe like that. So by default, if you just launch the executable like that, you'll have an error telling that you need to specify a DB path. So basically you need to specify a folder where you'll store all the database information. So I'll just go in my MongoDB folder, and just next inside this folder, I'll make a new folder. I'll call this DB. And then if we launch this once again, you need to pass an argument for the path of your database. So the argument is /DB path, and then the path to your folder. So C MongoDB and DB. And then if you click enter, you have a running database. So now we can start Robo3T once again, and then we should be able to connect to our MongoDB instance. So we'll just start the app. So here, and then you click on connect, or actually make a new connection since we haven't made one yet. So we'll just create. And by default, Robo3T will be looking for a local connection on your computer. So by leaving it at localhost, you'll be able to connect to your computer. So if you're installing to another computer, you'll need to specify the IP of this computer. So since we're running everything on this localhost, we'll just click save. And then if we connect, we see that we have a working connection to MongoDB. So next we'll install the Python Mongo Engine module so that we can talk to MongoDB with Python. So I'll just close that for now and reduce this window. So we'll make a virtual env containing the package that we'll be needing. So we'll just make a new command prompt. And going at the root of my C drive, I'll just make a new virtual environment. So we'll make virtual env, and let's call this one Mongo Engine Tutorial. Okay, so our virtual environment has been created. So now we just need to activate this virtual env. So we'll just go inside the virtual environment. So slash Mongo Engine Tutorial. And then inside the script folder. And then we need to execute the activate byte file, which will activate our virtual env. So now it has been activated. So if we just do a quick pip list to see what we have installed in this virtual env, we see that here we only have the basic stuff inside our virtual env. So now we need to install everything that we'll be needing for this tutorial. So we'll install the Mongo Engine module of Python. So we'll call pip install Mongo Engine. So this is installing the package. And now if we do a quick pip list, we see that not only we have Mongo Engine, but also PyMongo, which is kind of the low-level API of MongoDB. So by downloading and installing the Mongo Engine package inside pip, we also download PyMongo, which will be needed for this tutorial. So now that we have everything installed correctly, let's go in PyCharm and let's start to take a look at Mongo Engine. Okay, so before diving into Mongo Engine, I think it's important, of course, to understand the basic concept of MongoDB and how it is working. So if you haven't watched it already, I would ask you to go on FXPhD and take a look at my previous training on PySide for Nuke, because if you go on class 6, I made one app that was using MongoDB as the backend database. So inside this specific training, I was showing how to use Robo3T, that at this time was called RoboMongo, but also show you the basic function of RoboMongo, but also the basic function of PyMongo, so that you can talk with MongoDB using the PyMongo database. So this will give you a really good overview of the concept of MongoDB, as well as how to interact with the PyMongo API of Python. Okay, so for those who haven't watched this training, let's take a quick look at MongoDB with Robo3T. So if we go in Robo3T here, and this first window is where we have all the server connection that we can make with MongoDB. So here I have already one connection, so I'll just disconnect for now and create a new one. So I've already started the MongoDB server. So now if I want to connect to it, I'll just click here and I'll connect to the local host. So we'll click on connect, and here we have made connection to MongoDB. So the next level inside MongoDB is what is called, of course, a database. So to make a new database inside Robo3T, we'll just click on our connection, and here we can create database. So let's call this one FXPhD and click create. So now we have our newly made database. And with MongoDB, everything, the next level is called a collection. And you can see a collection as a group of files that are the same type. So let's say you will make a collection for all your user document. You will make a collection for all your project, all your shot. So that's the system with MongoDB to group the same type of document in the same collection, so you can really find your document really fast because they're all grouped together. So once we go in our collection tab here, that's where you'll find all your document that you have in your collection. So let's just make a new collection. So I'll right click here and create collection. Let's call this one users and create. So if we expand that here, now we have our newly made collection. And here inside the collection, that's where you can make all your documents. So let's just right click and insert document. And you can see document inside MongoDB as simple JSON file. So just for this example, let's say the name. And let's call our user John Smith and click save. And now if we double click on our collection, we see that we have this document here, and that we have our name property with the name that we specify in this file. So now I could go back on my collection tab, make a new collection, call this one projects, create, and then we see we have two collections. And in this collection now I could start to make also document. So let's say this. So again, I will make name and test and click save. If we go now in our project collection, we see that we have this new document in our project collection. So that's kind of the basic of MongoDB. So you have your database, so you could have multiple databases, but inside each of the database, that's where you create all your collection of group document of the same type. And inside this collection, you can have as many documents as you want. So now let's see how we can interact with MongoDB using the Python API. So let's start with the basic PyMongo API that is a bit more low level than Mongo Engine that we'll be using. So to connect to MongoDB, you need to import PyMongo. So we'll use the from statement. So from PyMongo, import everything. Then we need to make a client instance to our server. So let's make client equal Mongo client. So that's the function to connect to the server. So optionally, you could specify the IP of the server if you're connecting to a remote computers, but since we're connecting to a local server, we'll just use the empty parameter. So just fix the typo here. So client, that. So now we're connected to the server. So let's make a new database. So db equal client, and then we'll pass the name of the database that we want to connect to. So let's make fxphd. So if you already have a database in MongoDB, that would make a reference to it, else it will just create a new database called fxphd. So now we need to make an instance of a collection. So let's say we want to make a new collection called users. So collection equal, so we take our database and then we specify the name of the collection. So users. So now to make a new document, it's just a matter of making a dictionary that will be saved as a JSON file. So let's make user equal, and let's just make an empty dict for now. So first let's make maybe a name parameter. So user name equal John. And then you could add other parameters. So user, let's say we want to put the age. So age equal, let's say 40. And now let's say we want to save this document in our collection. So we'll take our collection object, so collection.save, and then we'll pass our dictionary, so user. So now if we run this and go back in Robo3T and refresh our connection, we see that we have this new database, and inside the collection we have a user collection, and inside this users, if we double click here, we see that we have this single document. So we see that we have our age parameter here, that is an integer. And then we have this name, which is a string. So we can see the type here. And you see that with every document that you have in MongoDB, there's also automatically a user, an object ID, which basically is a UID to make every object unique inside MongoDB. So that's the really basic of PyMongo to create a document. Of course, there's some function to query the database, but that's something you can see, like I said, in my previous class on PySide, where you'll see all the kind of function and operation that you can use using PyMongo. But that's, like I said, the very low-level API that you can use with Python when you want to talk with MongoDB. But the thing is that even though you can do pretty much everything with this API, it's kind of, like I said, low level. So if you want to have some restriction and operation on top of your database, you'll have to implement various functions so that you can restrict the kind of operation you can do in the database. Because let's say now that I make another document, so I'll make a change, maybe the age of this one to maybe 20, but I'll keep the same name here. So I'll run this again. So this will make a new user document in our collection. So if I just refresh our collection, see that we have now our two document. But let's say that we don't want two users in our database that are using the same name. So by default, there's nothing in PyMongo to implement that. So you would have to implement that yourself. Or maybe you want to implement that you don't need to specify a specific property of your document, that maybe you want a default value. So that's also something you will have to implement in your code. Or maybe you want to build a class object in Python and save it directly inside MongoDB. So that's also something that you will need to implement with PyMongo, because nothing is done by default to do this kind of operation. So by using Mongo Engine, that's exactly what Mongo Engine is doing. You have a lot of new options available to yourself to implement those kind of things. So that's exactly what we'll be showing next by taking a look at Mongo Engine. But again, like I said, this was barely just an introduction to MongoDB. So please make sure to check my other training on MongoDB before jumping in the next part of this training, just to make sure that you really understand the foundation of MongoDB and all the basic operation of PyMongo that you can do before jumping with Mongo Engine. So you'll make sure that you really understand everything that we'll be doing next. Okay, so enough of PyMongo. Let's use MongoDB. That, as you'll see, will be a much more cleaner and better way to interact with MongoDB. So first we need, of course, to import the Mongo Engine modules. So we'll use the from statement. So from Mongo Engine, we will import everything. Next, we need to make a connection to a database. So we'll use the connect function that was imported by using the star statement here. So connect, and then we'll specify the name of a database that we either want to connect if it's already created, or that we want to create from scratch. So let's make fxphd as our database. And then the concept of Mongo Engine is to specify some class that will be able to save inside our database. So let's make a new class. So I think for a basic example, let's make a user object that will be able to save in our database. So let's make a class called user. And then with Mongo Engine, you need to subclass everything from the document class that is important with the star statement as well. So this will give you access to a lot of function to interact with Mongo Engine. So we subclass our class from the document class. And then the first thing we need to do is specify all the property that we want to save in our class inside MongoDB. So let's make maybe a property called first name. So first name equal, and then you have access to what is called with Mongo Engine field. So you have a lot of different type of field that you can use with Mongo Engine. So you have, let's say the first one, maybe the most useful one is a string field. So you have this one. Then maybe you can have one for the age. So age equal, and then you have an int field. Then maybe we could specify another one, want to specify an email. So email equal email field. So you have access to a lot of different type of field with Mongo Engine. So we'll take a look at different field a bit later, but for now, you see that you have access to some field that will also give you some option depending of the field, but also will act as a validation for the type of data that you're putting in the database. So for example, now let's say we want to save one user to the database. So we'll make a new instance of this class. So let's say u equal user. And then we need to specify the data for each of the properties. So let's make first name equal, let's call this one John. Then we'll specify the age. So age equal, and then 20. And then let's specify an email. So email equal, let's say John at fxphd.com. And then to save that to the database, we'll use the save function. So by making an instance of this class, we then specify all the property that we've specified here, and then we use the save function to save it to the database. So let's run this. So now if we refresh our connection here, we see that we've created our fxphd database. And inside here, we have a collection call user based on our class name. And if we double click on the collection, we have our document here with the first name, parameter, property, the age, and the email. But now let's go back to this document and see the kind of option that this is giving us. So I'll just drop the collection so that we can delete everything and start from scratch. So we'll just refresh everything. So we've deleted our fxphd database. So now let's say for the age, I try to save something like a string. So I'll just put a random string. So maybe this, whoops, just put it inside the quote. So this. So now if I run this, we see that we have an error here that is telling us that we have a validation error because inside this in field here, we've put a string. So you see that already by using the field of Mongo Engine, we have a validation step before we can save the document to the database. So for instance, here in this email, if let's say I remove the @ sign here, and I'll just re-put a valid in for the age. So let's put 18 and run this. We see that we also have a validation error here because this is not a valid email address. So you see that already the field is really helping us in validation, in terms of validation for what we put in the database. Now let's also take a look at a different way that we can set the priority on our document. So here you see that we're putting all the keyword inside the user class here when making an instance out of it, but you could also just make a simple instance of the class and then you could specify the priority after. So you could use u.firstname equal John, u.age equal 20, and u.email equal our John at fxphd.com, and then you would take the object and save it. So that will also work as well. So now if we go here, fxphd, we have the exact same thing. You could also mix both. So instead here, let's remove the first name and put it directly here. So first name equal John, and run this, and you'll have the exact same result. So when making a new class, you can either use this keyword directly inside the class curation as well as the property setting after having an instance of the object. But when you'll be getting an object out of MongoDB and you want to set a new value for the property, you'll have to use this kind of operation to set and modify the property inside one of the documents. So let's continue by exploring the various options that we have with all those field objects. So we'll just delete that. So if we continue to add some property to this document, so let's add last name, and we'll make this a string field as well. So now, and let's add maybe a description for the user. So description, and we'll make this a string field as well. So right now, we don't put any keyword argument inside those fields, so we're not really specifying any requirement for those fields. So right now, if I make a user, I could just specify one property, so the first name, and save this object and run this. So if we update this, take a look at the third object, we see that we've only added the first name property to our object. So let's specify some requirement that we must specify when creating the document. So to make a field mandatory to the document, so that we must create it at when we make the object, we can use the required keyword and specify if it's required or not when making the document. So let's say that we must make a first name when making a new document. So we'll put that as true, and we'll do the same thing for the last name. So required equal true. So now let's say I'm trying to make this document by not providing the last name. We should have an error telling us that we need to provide the last name property. So we'll run this. And sure enough, we have our validation error happening here, telling that we are requiring to put a last name. So we'll provide a last name. So last name equal Smith, like that. Then we could also provide some minimum and maximum character that a string field can have. So for the description, let's say that we want to have between 5 and 20 character for the description. So we could put minimum length equal 5, and we also have the max length that we can provide, and we'll pass 20. So now if we add the description, so description equal, and let's put just 4 character, we'll run this. So we have the too short happening, so we'll add 1. So now we're good to go. And if we had over 20 character, we should have the error that it's too long. So we could also specify some restriction in terms of the length that we can provide in a string field. Another useful one would be the default keyword to specify a default value if we don't provide the document with a value. So let's say we want to add a property to say if the user is active or not in the database. So we'll make a new property called active equal, and we'll make something called a Boolean field. So we can provide this with a Boolean value. So let's say that when we create this document, we want to make it active by default. So we could provide the default equal true. So now if I make a new document and I'm not providing a value at creation, at the creation time for the active properties. So if I run this and refresh the collection and take a look at this last object, we see that we haven't provided the value, but still in the database, we see that we have an active value set to true. So now I've deleted the collection once again to show you another advantage of the default keyword. So I'll just comment this for now so that we don't have the active priority in our document. And I'll just create a few user documents. I'll just run this a few times. So now if we go in our user collection, we have our 4 document, and you see that none of the document has the active priority inside of it. So now I could reactivate this, and let's say that later down the road, when you have a lot of document inside your database and you decide to add a new property to your document, the default value that you specify here will be returned even though it's not specified inside the database. So let me show you that. Let's say I will just comment the user creation, and I'll just query all the document inside our database. So don't worry about now. I'll just do a quick example about getting some document, but we'll see much more complete example on how to query the database later in this training. So just for now, I'll just do a quick search equal user. So I take my class and the object method, and this will return all the document in this class. So now I could, let's say, do for I in search print I. So this will print one by one all the document returned by this query. So I could print let's say the first name. So we'll print i.firstName, and since they all have right now the same first name in the property, they're all returned John. But now let's say I print the active property. So I'll print active. So you'll see that even though we don't have this property saved in the database, since we added this property here and we set a default, if I run this, you see that they all return true by default. So when you will query the database for a specific document, it will look inside the schema of your class. And if the property is not saved in the database, then it would look for a default value specified inside your schema. So now you could, let's say I will just delete that, and from this query, I will just take the first document of the query. So now what I could do is say search, which currently return one document, dot active, and then I could say false, and then I could save the document once again, and I'll run this. And if we refresh everything, we see that if we open the document, the three last documents still don't have the property that we added. But you see that since we've reset a new value for the active property of the document, this one is having a new property added to the document, and it has the false value that we've specified here. So that's another really good advantage of using the default value inside a field. So let's continue by taking a look at other property that we can use inside the field. So we'll just put that on again. So let's now say that we want a specific property to be unique in the database. So you see now that we're using the same name, the first name and last name over and over again in all the document. But let's say that we'll be adding some email, and that we don't have to have two users that are using the same email. So you could have two users with the same first name, the same last name, but we don't have to have a conflict and having a user using the same email twice. So here in the email, we can specify the unique keyword and pass it through that will tell the database that if we're trying to create another document that has already the email specified at the creation of the document, it will throw out an error at the creation time of the document. So let me just delete this once again. So we remove all document. So we'll just delete the description for now and put email and equal. So we'll put John Smith at fxphd.com, and we'll save this. So if we refresh this, we have our email here. So now let's try to recreate the same document using the same email. So now you see that we're having the duplicate key error in the collection that is thrown to us. So it's a very powerful way to make sure that if you want to have just one instance of a property in all your collection, you can use the unique keyword as a property of your field. So other property you can use are choices. So let's say that we want to add something called artist type to define what type of artist this user is. So now we can make a string field, and then we can use the choices keyword and provide it with a list of possibility that we can use. So we could say compositor, maybe modeler, and let's say lighter, like that. So adding this as at our creation of the document, let's say artist type equal, and let's for now use a compositor. So compositor, and we'll just make this a bit cleaner, so we'll just put that on separate line. So this, like that. So now if we run this, we still have our duplicate key, so we'll just change the email. So let's say John2, run this. So now we see that everything is working because we've provided one of the choice that we define in the possibility of this choices keyword. So I'll just change my email once again to 3 so that we don't have the duplicate key error on the email. But now let's say I provide something that is not in the choices. So I'll just put something random like that, run this, and now we have our value error that is not in the choice. So that's another validating step that we can use as a keyword for the field. And we can also use the validation keyword to specify a function that will validate the data that we provide to the field to see if it's accepted or not. So let's say that in our description, we want to make sure that all the text is lowercase, for example. So we'll just add the validation equal, and then you specify a function name. So we'll be calling this one, let's say validate description, and then here we'll make the function that will validate the actual data. So def validate description, and then the first will provide an argument that is the actual value that we set when we make the document. So now let's say that we want to make sure that everything is uppercase or lowercase or whatever. So we'll do a simple if statement. So if val dot is lower, so we want to make sure that everything is lowercase. So in this case, we'll make if not val dot is lower. So if not everything is lowercase, then we'll raise an error. So we'll call this one validation error, and we'll say description needs to be lower case, like that. So here at the creation of the document, for now we'll just delete the email and replace that with description equal. We'll just put a simple description. So this is a test. We'll run this. And we'll just put back our compositor here so that we have a valid choice. So once again, we'll run this. So if we update this, we see that we have this document created without any error. But now let's make something uppercase. So this is a test with T uppercase. Run this, and we see that we have our validation error happening and that we have a description needs to be lowercase. So now this is pushing it to the next level in terms of validation. So you can really make sure that what is passed as the value of a specific field is very specific and really you want to be in the database. So now maybe another type of field that we haven't seen yet that is going to be really useful is the list field. So we'll just add a new priority. So I don't know, for the sake of this example, let's call this one favorite movies. And we'll make this a list field. So basically this is right now, you can specify any item in the list, but if you want to only accept, for example, string field, you could pass the string field function inside this, and this will tell the list field that only string can be inserted inside this list. So just clear everything for now, just start from scratch. So we've deleted the collection. So we'll just add, instead of a description, we'll just put favorite movies equals, and we'll pass a list. And let's say, for the sake of this example, I just put 1. So here we should have an error happening because we're passing an int, and here we specify that we only want string. So if we run this, we have our string field error, our validation error that specify that we only accept string. So if I come back here and change this to a string and run this, now we see that if we go back in our collection, in our favorite movie, we have a list that contain 1 string. So that's another very useful field that you can use, and as well you can use this validation step to make sure that you only contain the type of element that you want in your list. So I think that covers pretty much the basic of all the field that you can put in a document with its keyword. So of course there's a lot more field that you can use inside the Mongo engine document. So take a look at the doc for all the possibility that you can use. But I think that covers pretty much the basic kind of field that you can be using. But like I said, there's a lot of different field that you can use. And also take a look at the documentation in terms of option that each field will give you. Because for instance, for the email field, you have option in it to validate the type of domain and anything that is related to email. So the email field, for instance, will give you more option than other fields. So each field has its different set of option. So it's worth taking a look. So just maybe before ending this training, now the cool thing is that you can, since this is a class, you can start to add your custom function to your class. So let's say that we want to add a login property to our object. So let's say that our login will always be the first letter of the first name and then the last name. So now, instead of storing this in the document, since we know that it's going to be a rule based on the 2 name of the person, so what we could do is make a new function that we'll call login, like that. And then this would return, so the first letter of the first name, so self.firstname, and then we'll take the first letter of the word, and then we'll add the last name, so self.lastname, and we want to make sure that everything is lowercase. So we'll put that between parentheses, and we'll make sure to return everything in lowercase. So now, without even storing this property in the database, we can have now this property returned dynamically based on the other property of the document. So we'll just make this a property of the document. So we'll just add this declaration here. So we'll make this a property like that. So now if we just take our object here and call the login property, we'll just put a quick print statement. So like that. And we see we have our email error since we are trying to make another user with an empty email. So the MongoDB database is not accepting this. So we'll just specify an email. So email equal and test@test.com, like that. So we'll just run this and that. So we see we've made our new document, and here we print our login property. So we're taking the first letter of John and then adding Smith, and everything is returned as lowercase. So you also see the advantage of this PyMongo document system, that you can start to add some property, custom property to your document. As you'll see, we'll be even adding some custom function that will do custom action with our class. So in the next video, what we'll be seeing is we'll continue with the basic of Mongo Engine, but this time we'll be looking on how we can query some document in the database so that we can get very specific document based on our search keyword. So see you in the next video.